We're here to talk about strengthening data security.
From our team.
Yeah.
Agencies do face a lot of huge challenges in securing data. You've got tightening budgets, you've got evolving attacks, you've got all kinds of old systems, you name it, it exists. So we're going to talk about how to secure the data, make sure everything is on the up and up, things like data encryption, all that sort of thing. So with me today, here on the panel, Joel Kruzwick, Federal CTO at GitLab. Joel, welcome.
Thank you.
Sherilyn Pascoe, who is the Director of the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at NIST. Sherilyn, welcome.
Thank you.
And Chris Wallace, Chief of Cybersecurity at Defense Healthcare Management Systems. Chris, thanks for coming up with us.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to start with you because I'm sure you get the data that you're protecting is valuable.
Yes.
How do you stay ahead of the bad guys in keeping that stuff safe in this evolving landscape?
So really when you look at things, you have to go back to basics first, right? You have to look at that cyber hygiene that we always talk about, right? Knowing what you don't know as best you can. But you have to really start to look at where your partners are in this, right? You know, we've heard a couple times today, Ms. Shelby, things like that, where you can't go alone, right? You have to really rely on your team. You have to rely on NIST. You have to rely on, for us, the DoD CIO office, and a lot of partners that you have to look at. The FBI even, right? So as we start to transition more towards our cloud-centric activities, things like that, we look at both from the cybersecurity aspect. It's not just the ones and zeros, right? It's a traditional security aspect. It's the physical security as well, where your data centers are, what's the security around those data centers, what do the circuits look like, right? Because what you have in transport is just as important as what you have at rest, right? So when we look at data, we look at how that is, we try to be as holistic as possible, right? And to stay out ahead of that, it's vigilance more than anything else, right? Understanding what your traditional defense in depth functions are, but then also as you start to look at, ransomware for us is a big deal. We have Medusa, we have the Van Helsing, which has just, come online. So we have to stay out ahead of that and understand what those vectors are, right? Where do we traditionally see those kind of things? And so looking at the credentialing, right? The access management, the user analytics are extremely important. It's to protect the data, you have to have the data, right? To see and work through all those problems, right? To try to get out ahead and fix things before they find things. So that's in a nutshell, the core that we have to stay after is those little nuggets from physical security all the way through the more traditional aspects of the cloud infrastructure security.
What do those dialogues look like? What does that partnership conversation look like for you when you're talking about that?
So it's important that we know the players, right? So like we talked about FBI, having contact with those regional offices, right? Having contact with the cyber center for the FBI to make sure that we understand where we are. We have a layered security. We have a very good relationship with Defense Health Agency and our CSSP. There's relationships with CISA at that point. So you really have to take it and build those relationships, right? Because coming in cold, they may not know who we are, right? So you have to understand what your environment looks like, be able to convey that information in a way that kind of guides them into seeing and helping you the best they can, because not everybody is the same, right? We can go into, and we'll go through a bunch of other areas, I'm sure, when it comes to education, when it comes to, how we look at the different structures and how we get after the compliance side of things, but the really understanding what's on the horizon and being able to meld that physical security in with the traditional cybersecurity functions.
Yeah, having those boundaries and frameworks and those kinds of things, guidance, those things are important.
They're very important.
To that end, I do want to talk about the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, which you were one of the stewards and big part of your world, Sherilyn. So it's got a lot of best practices, got a lot of guidance. How does that port to data security, and how are agencies taking it and using it?
Yeah, I mean, so as was just mentioned, cybersecurity is a constant challenge, and I think that there's a lot of different priorities right now. So the NIST cybersecurity framework is a very helpful tool to help assess, communicate, and prioritize your cybersecurity efforts within your organization. And it is based around what we call 6 key functions to help organizations kind of manage and reduce their cybersecurity risks. For example, when we're talking about data security, right, the govern function, which is the new function in CSF 2.0, we're very proud of govern. It's gotten a lot of accolades, and folks like the new function, focus on cybersecurity governance, making sure that folks understand their roles and responsibilities and the role of senior leadership. Identify, another key function of the framework, focused on understanding and identifying your assets, your key critical data. Protect, the steps that you're going to take, encryption, secure architectures to secure the data that you've identified. These are really critical foundational steps in cybersecurity, and so we've seen that the framework itself is a helpful kind of tool to think about how you're going to approach this, how you're going to prioritize everything that you need to do. But at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper, it's just a framework. And so some of the steps that we're taking at NIST through the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which I now lead, having given up my CSF 2.0 hat a year and a half ago. At the NCCW, our mission is to try to advance adoption of cybersecurity standards and cybersecurity technologies. So standards like the framework. And we've got a number of great projects right now focused on data security. We've got a Zero Trust project on implementing Zero Trust. We're working on data classification, how to use tools to identify and classify data. We've got a project on data confidentiality, on how to leverage commercially available technologies to implement the framework. So all of that is done kind of in partnership with industry, in partnership with other government agencies, so that we're kind of collectively harnessing all of the goodness from the cybersecurity community to be able to help implement this framework.
Yeah, sure. Joel, I saw you were nodding along with that. Certainly the industry side of it is huge in this. So where are you coming down on that and the data security side?
Yeah, well, as a participant in some of those very groups you just mentioned, I clearly am nodding my head in agreement. We love being a part of that, so thanks for that. I think you mentioned what's most interesting is when I think about the CSF and I think about 2.0, the governance piece does stand out, right? That's right where my mind goes. And what, from a practical perspective, I think is most interesting is we talk about data and we talk about residency a lot, and we talk about some of the permissions and requirements that it takes to get to that data. And yet we keep seeing things like, well, what does a practical breach look like? If we look across it, 70 to 90%, depending on which stat you read, of of internet traffic is APIs, right? That's what's going on. Our failure to secure APIs continues to be this dominant thing, and the APIs are the dominant way we access our data. So from a practical perspective, when we talk about governance and we talk about data, how are you governing the access to your data through something like an API? Is it an afterthought? And so I think as we talk about elevating your data posture, things like that are top of mind for me from a practical perspective as to where's that access coming from and what's the primary access methodologies that are going to be your potential biggest threat.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk access management. Chris, I know you mentioned we were going to come back to it. Let's come back to it. How are you managing that on the API front, on the user identity front? How is that strengthening your data strategy?
I think a lot of areas, they really rely on the human aspect, right, that access. And a lot of times the non-human is a very big blind spot, right? How you look at the tiering of that access, right? How we are able to see the data, right? We historically really relied on RBAC, right? The role-based access control. But when we start to look at where we're going, right, and looking at that API security and looking at all the other analytics that we now have to capture, right, I would argue that ABAC is probably the attribute access control is probably the better way to go because you have a better insight into potential insider threat. You have anomaly, you can improve on anomaly detection when you start to add in some of the other tools that you should be having in your environment, right? And it's on the API side, it's typically there's a tell, right? However subtle it could be, of that change, right? That anomaly that starts to show. And if you're not seeing it, if you're not able to really look at it, you can't defend against it. You can't fix or add the additional security into your APIs where, because the configurations are still managed by humans, right? There's still a lot of things like that. But then we can talk AI and ML functions and how we manage a lot of these things, because it's the speed at which we have to look at data and how we have to secure these things. We're going to need help, right? We can't do it all. We don't have enough man hours. We don't have enough manpower really to manage all that. So being able to actually rely on different aspects, right? The deep learning type of capabilities that's out there to see the anomalies and be able to work against that access management piece and really kind of wrap in those API, because I agree, the API is probably one of the more forgotten, right? They think it's an API, it's there to help us. Well, yeah, it does help, but if you don't manage it and you don't secure it, it will work against you eventually, right? And if you're not seeing it and you can't catch the anomaly, you can't fix it.
Well, you mentioned the different security methods and the ways to sort of buttress some of those things. So I do want to talk about the different environments that we have data stored, that agencies, industry, academia, so much data. So how do you manage that? The different environments, the different on-prem, cloud, whatever.
So it does go back to the basics, right? The classification and how you push against. The CSF is a really good tool, again, because the governance function of that. But you should be able to use that framework and the adaptability of it to really apply it to all of the injects, right, as we'll call it, right? Because for us, in the EHR that we have it's the largest in the world, right? And everybody wants a piece of it.
Yeah.
So how do you, again, we go back to access controls, because you can't trust everybody, right? You have to look at that, but you have to really start to look at how that data is classified, right? Because if you're a researcher and you want to come in and look at certain data, that classification may be barely sensitive, right? But if you're going to start digging into the CUI functions, right, with PII and PHI, we have to ramp up how we protect against that, right? And it's going to be if it's another DoD entity, right, we look and say, okay, you have these parameters in place, you have standard practices in place, but if we go out to industry, right, there are certain cases where industry, the policies don't align, right, for how they look at and how they protect their data may not align to the DoD, right? We may be more stringent in some areas, so we now have to help coach, and bring them along, to where we can have that access. We partner with Oracle, we partner with a lot of other entities that have embraced and helped us, right? We do a lot with VA, right? And even within the federal landscape between the DoD and other federal agencies, there may be some differences there, but we partner very well. We communicate, pretty well to be able to determine, okay, where are those gaps, right? And how do you manage your data, and at what sensitivities are you seeing this particular piece, and then what sensitivity do we see it, right? Because again, not all data is the same, right? Like you stated, but when you look at how you share it, right? The encryptions matter. How you actually look at what their end goal is, right? Again, we go back to policy, right? Is it just a moment in time that they need to grab this certain data set and work with that for research purposes, or are they actually going to take this now and build out their own programs, because of a shared need, right? So you may not be able to see how the changes of the modification of that data is. So you have to be able to have the tools and everything now to look and see what that change is as it comes back in, the integrity checks, all the other functions that have to go with that. So it's not a one and done, like you have your data, we have our data. You really have to dig, and you really have to figure out where from policy all the way to that endpoint encryption for how that's going to work.
Yeah, certainly that seems like the kind of thing that needs to be a constant feedback loop almost.
Always, yeah.
And how does the framework sort of put that through? And how have you, again, outside of the cybersecurity framework, you know this stuff as well as anyone, that kind of data movement, a lot of potential there for some bad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing I think that's highlighted is that, and one of the changes that we made with CSF 2.0 is this process of continuous improvement. We actually added it as a subcategory just to make sure that folks understand that it's so important. There is no such thing as like, oh, I did cybersecurity today and I'm done. We are all continuing to evolve in our cybersecurity efforts, and it is something that we're continuing to learn from and grow together. In fact, I think that if you're in this room today, it means that you're probably doing a really good job in your cybersecurity. I think I'm more concerned about the folks that are not in this room today, and the gap that is occurring between, as cybersecurity becomes more and more complex and difficult, we have a number of organizations that are, perhaps unable to keep pace with all the changes that are occurring.
Yeah, it's certainly very dynamic. But back to the environment thing, I know, Joel, is something that I know you've talked about. I've talked to you before about. So how do you keep those things sort of secure from cloud, on-prem, device, those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big evolutionary moments we're in, right? So the classification, the access management pieces, those are pivotal because, again, practically when you look out at the market and you read about the new breach that just occurred, right? Pick a day. What is that article going to say? 75 to 80% of the time, it's going to say something about a third-party involvement. So when you think about your access credentials and who has access to what systems and what classified data is available where, we have an evolutionary moment occurring where bad actors are spending their time, instead of trying to penetrate the system, they're now trying to access valid credentials to get to those systems. And that's how they're getting to your data. And the numbers are staggering at the moment as to how many of those bad actors have valid credentials when these breaches are occurring. So this is kind of that evolutionary moment. I think my advice would be, no matter what your system or who you're giving access to, do your best to centralize the access management more and more, even across those parties that we're talking about, because the risk is real and it's burgeoning at the moment.
How easy or hard is that to do, to centralize that kind of access management? Because it doesn't strike me as particularly easy.
I wouldn't say it's particularly easy, but at the same time, it shouldn't be that hard. A lot of times we just draw this hard line and say, well, we can't do that. We can't help you with that. Just make sure you're careful. And I think there's got to be a better view of policy, auditing, and those kind of things, which really aren't as complex as we a lot of times make them out to be.
Yeah, and certainly the job, a phrase people that know me are tired of hearing me say, the job is the job. It's got to get done. So it's, certainly, if it's hard, okay, but it's got to get done. Yeah, certainly. So I want to get back to some of the things you talked about with AI and ML and how that sort of works within it, Chris, and I'll certainly, Joel and Sherry, I want you to pipe in as well. When we're talking about access management, that's a big part of this data conversation. So how is AI and ML helping bring these things forward? Because you don't have the labor hours to do it, certainly with people.
Yeah, I think it's still in flux in a lot of ways. A lot of the tools that we're seeing now, even with like Microsoft and a lot of those, while we may not see it on the front end, right? They have a lot of capability in the back end that helps us organize these things, right? So it's partnering with industry is absolutely important, right? But understanding what those tools are, where the AI and ML comes into play, right? And when we talk cloud, right? You have the AWS side, you have Oracle. They have AI functions that they really have worked hard on, right? That can be a benefit, but in any case. And I say this quite regularly, you can't look at it in a singular AI, right? If the minute you say we're going AI, you need to prepare for a multimodal environment, right? Because you're going to need AI and ML, or you're going to need other functions to manage those AIs eventually, right? So understanding how they're built, understanding what the data is that actually helps build them, right? What in like the case of GPTs, things like that, you want to make sure that the data in is quality so that you avoid the hallucinations, you avoid the bias, you avoid a lot of things that you run into. But even when you start to look at more functional type of work, right, from the security aspects, those deep learning pieces, right, to be able to actually look at the data to check for modifications that may have happened in transit, right, or if somebody on the other end had a misstep with credentials or had gained access and that it was feeding across, you should be able to catch that, right? Again, we go back to anomaly detection. We go back to a lot of other things that AI is absolutely one of the things that, I think is a benefit, but it, from the, and DoD policy-wise, we have to do it responsibly. We have to do it the right way to ensure that how we implement or even how we engage with industry partners and things like that on AI, that it meets that standard, right? It's not just, AI is great, we're going to do AI and, bring it online. Like, we have to be able to manage that right from the very start, right? And then that goes back to the security, right? You look at how you utilize encryption, S3 buckets and how you do a lot of that work. It's very important that you, again, have that holistic view of your environment. It's not, again, AI and everything is great. I think there's so much use that we still don't know, or the capability that it still has. But if we can't upskill the talent to move along with it, or if we can't manage how we implement it at every level, then we're effectively giving up our control. And that's not something that, especially in the DoD, we can't give up that level of control. The adversaries are too active, and they will manipulate every chance they get to get into our systems and reap the benefits of our data.
Managing the multimodal aspect of that, though, how does that factor into keeping data safe and keeping the bad guys from banging down the doors?
Yeah, so accesses, right? How you use AI to correlate data so that that who you're sharing with is receiving only that amount of data, right? To do it at speed, at scale, is very important. But with that, again, we go back to that deep learning capability, like taking that view of what the data is as it goes out, and then having that comparison as data comes in, right? That the integrity check is very important to make sure that any modification that's done is known and appropriate, right? Because the minute you modify that data, now you're essentially poisoning the well, right? If you don't know what it is and it becomes bad data, and you're going to use this in research, you're going to use it for other things, or if it's even a medical record with an erroneous entry, right? It has effect. We've got millions of beneficiaries that we have to be responsible for. We absolutely want to make sure that data is correct and proper at any use.
Please.
Oh, I was just gonna, I have to speak on AI.
Please.
You can't be at a cybersecurity conference and not talk about AI. So right now, there's a lot of opportunities for cybersecurity with AI. There's also a lot of challenges, right? And so this morning, NIST is holding a workshop on cybersecurity and AI. It will be recorded, so don't leave this one. But you can watch it after, and we encourage your participation in this effort. We're going to be working with the community over the next several months to take the NIST cybersecurity framework and develop what's called a community profile for AI. So looking at how we can use the taxonomy of the CSF to be able to kind of both have the secure use of AI, but also figure out how we can advance AI for cybersecurity. So we're really excited about this effort. We completely sold out the event in like 2 hours. So a lot of interest in the community in helping us to kind of craft this guidance that hopefully will be kind of useful and effective in terms of prioritizing some of the efforts here. I think it's also going to identify some of gaps in terms of further research that needs to be done, informing kind of our roadmap at NIST for kind of future guidance and tools that we need to develop. But overall, the NCCU has done a lot of work in this space. We've got a great test platform called Diopter that we released a few months ago, looking at how to test AI against adversarial attacks. we're developing internally our own LLM tools so that we can use them to be more efficient and try to kind of take advantage of this new future. We're also learning a whole lot just from our own use of these tools about the security aspects of them. So we're really excited about this and are kind of optimistic about the future of the use of AI in cybersecurity.
What were some of the conversations about? I know you were there a little bit this morning. What were some of those about, particularly on the data side?
Yeah, so right now we are really trying to determine the scope of this profile, right? That's kind of like step one. What do organizations really feel like they need in terms of guidance around AI? And is it both, like I said, is it both making sure that AI is secure? Is it about how to use AI for cybersecurity? Is it how to protect yourselves against AI attacks? What is the top concern? The other thing is that there is a lot of work already being done in this space, and we don't want to duplicate any of it. If anything, we want to make sure that we are drawing connections between existing resources, which I think is why the CSF is so powerful, is how do you kind of merge all this material into one to make it easier for organizations to use when they're trying to make their own decisions. So we're at the start of the process. Follow back up with that question in like 6 months.
I will absolutely do that, 100%. You know I will. Joel, please.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm thinking about this, and yeah, a lot of the existing stuff is so good. Like there's a definite crossover there for a lot of those things. To go back to the term multimodal, right? We've used that a lot up here. I want to twist that a little bit to like multi-model for a moment. Just when you think about data security and you think about your AI use, when I look at it, so I live in source code world, right? That's just what I do every day. I'm in source code. A couple of years of AI use with source code now, and what I start to think about is the fact that you're not using a single model. You're not using a single interface system. Unless you're hosting it all yourself, even then there's a public-private partnership issue here where you're using a vendor and something is supported in some way, and what context of data can go out. When you're using AI, you've got inputs, you've got outputs from AI. What information's going out, and the fact that as agents come online, there's more contextualization of your data. It has a broader spectrum that it can access to send information up into that engine. So if you're hosting the engine yourself, that's one thing. If you're in an isolated environment, that's another. If you're in the cloud, it may be that you're actually using one product that has tendrils out into 10 different AI systems, utilizing 15 to 20 different models. And I would love for you to know, and I've foot-stomped this in the past, I would love for you to know exactly what engines, what clouds, and what models you're using, regardless of what product you are working in. And so if there's not an AI transparency center of some kind available from your vendors, make sure you get it, because you need to know where your data is at all times, what that data looks like, how long it's being held onto in those environments, because those kind of things are the next level of data security that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about. Where is it resident? How much was pulled up with that one query that you thought was going to the cloud? The answer is probably more than you think, because it has access to anything else that's up in your browser at the moment, potentially. So those kind of things I think are top of mind from a practical perspective, as I hear us talking through what does that scope need to look like?
I'm sure certainly for PHI and PI, that's a major concern.
Yeah, it's huge. You have to absolutely know where your data is. I mean, I agree that having that transparency is an awareness of where your data is at any time is absolutely important. And I can tell you that our program management office works very, very hard at trying to make sure that all of that is in line and properly scoped for whoever may be connecting to it or where it is. And it's the level of risk assessments that we do, right? How we look at anyone coming to look at it is mind-blowing, right? We had a conversation with some folks that they're like, yeah, we do probably 10 or 15 risk assessments a year. And we're like, oh, well, we do 10 or 15 in about 2 days. So it's like, we end up running through hundreds and hundreds of risk assessments, at any given time, depending on who needs what, where exactly is that data going? And part of that is, again, it helps us with that awareness, right? Because it forces us to then look, because like you pointed out, you can't just say, okay, we did cyber today, good job, everybody, we'll see you next year. It just doesn't work that way, right? It's a continuous piece that we talk about continuous monitoring, monitoring and understanding where that data is part of that, right? And that's one of the things I do like about the CSF 2.0, right? We talked about the adaptability, but when you take that and you align it to like the cybersecurity endorsement implementation guide, right? So we start to look at the RMF processes and a lot of different controls and how all that aligns and looking at your attributes, right? You can take a lot of that and really mold that into that governance structure to really understand. So they work very well together overall, right? Because the survivability and the resilience of your data and your architecture and your structures is paramount. Like if you're working your data in a house of cards, you're going to have a problem, right? And once that falls down, if you can't put it back together quickly, then you will, suffer irreparable damage, right? And that reputation, the trust, and it doesn't just affect us as the DoD at that point. Now that trust is bruised everywhere through all of our partners, right? So we're very careful. We really want to make sure that survivability and the resilience is a very strong function for us.
When you talk about DR or business continuity, that actually really resonates heavily with me at the moment, because we're talking about that a lot more in AI systems too. Once you become reliant on those systems, what does business continuity look like if one of those systems disappears? That's a question we haven't had to ask before, and it's starting to become pretty prevalent.
Yeah, agreed.
We're getting close to our time, so I do want to talk about risk assessment and the training and awareness and those kinds of things, because I have talked to some of your colleagues at NIST as well about the risk mindset that people have to have. How do you bring that forward to people so that security on the human side can be up to date with all the AI and technology?
Yeah, so I think it's been said before on the panel, but cybersecurity is all about people. At NCCOE, we spend all of our time focused on technology and standards, but it's always about people at the end of the day. And awareness is so important. It's something that needs to be part of everybody's responsibility. Training is certainly something that varies depending on your work roles. But it's always about people. And I think, at the NCCOE, we are, we have a lot of processes, and we're a very research-oriented organization. So we're always trying new things. And one of the things that we do a lot of is kind of tabletop exercises. We do a lot of scenarios, and we do them for everything, right? We'll do them for cybersecurity incidents. We'll do them for, what if we lose our contract and we lose all of our contractors? What if we have a government shutdown and we lose our funding? What if a couple of our top NIST engineers walked out the door and we need to continue operations for the center? Some of these are fictitious examples and some of them are very real examples. And I think it's really not until you actually run through the scenarios, because you need the people to actually do it, do you start to realize kind of the gaps in your processes. You start to learn all the lessons learned. And so I think it's been really impactful for us, to kind of go through those efforts time and time again, so that we can we can learn from them. I think and specifically with respect to kind of awareness and training, I'll give a shout out to my colleagues from the NICE program at NIST. They're doing the really hard work of working with the community on cybersecurity training, cybersecurity workforce efforts. They've got some great guidance. NIST 850 was just updated to talk about cybersecurity awareness. There's an upcoming FACIA conference in May that's focused specifically on kind of federal cybersecurity training and awareness. So there's a lot of great efforts within the community where folks are talking about these things that you can plug into and adopt for within your agency.
Yeah, the human side. Chris?
Yeah, so I think, along with NIST, the DoD, DISA, the CIO office, has really helped us in a lot of ways become more cognizant and recognize. So we do a lot of like lunch and learns, but we focus a lot of things towards the cyber side, but we also try to relate it back to their personal lives as well. And we help them understand that yes, we're cybersecurity, but everybody is cyber. Everybody in the organization has a part to play in that. The DCWF and 8140 in the DoD side, we're able to map now a lot, and we look and say, okay, where are all of our folks, right? Where do we need to upskill personnel to meet the next challenge, right? And it also helps give opportunities to folks who, may not otherwise think about, oh, I can step up into the next role if I do this, right? So, it's important that we have that balance between what we know and what we see in all of our folks, and be able to foster that awareness and greater education to upskill folks, because upskilling is absolutely going to be needed. We are, a lot of our cyber stuff is long in the tooth, and we've got to upskill a lot of folks to make sure that they can meet the next challenge.
For sure. Joel, any final thoughts?
Yeah, real quick. I'll just call it a season of change, and awareness has to be just front of mind for all of us, right? There's so much change happening right now, and so keeping those policies well audited for the moment would do us all well.
For sure. Awareness. Certainly access control. These are the kinds of things that we need to do for data security. We've gone over time. I apologize, but this conversation was just simply too good. So I want to thank you all up here, and thanks to the audience for hanging with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.